So from the reciprocal tariffs, though, there are certain very good exemptions. The first are if you are subject to the Canada-Mexico tariff, you are not subject to the reciprocal tariffs. So under the first Trump administration, if you had a Chinese product, like a product in Mexico that was being made from a lot of China components, you could qualify for NAFTA and you could qualify as a product of Mexico. But you could also qualify as a product of China and have to pay the China tariff.
If the content we bring you on the podcast has helped you with your business or your career and you're looking for a way to financially support the independent production of this podcast, you can do that for as little as a few dollars a month by backing us on Patreon or becoming a paid subscriber on our YouTube channel. Another way to support us and continue your learning is to purchase one of our on-demand workshops available on our website, mapitforward.coffee/workshops. Check the show notes for links, and as always, thanks for the support. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new 5-part series with Mollie Sitkowski, trade compliance partner at Faegre Drinker, a law firm actually a global law firm, one of the top 100 law firms in the United States. And Mollie is joining us for the first time. This is an absolute honor for me, Mollie. I want to start this series by saying thank you for all of your brilliant LinkedIn posts, getting all of us up to date with what's going on while our heads are spinning about tariffs. And tariffs is what we're going to be talking about in this series. So thanks for joining us, Mollie.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. In this series, folks, we're going to be talking about understanding the impact of Trump's tariffs on the global coffee industry. And in this particular episode, we're talking about what are the tariffs and how do they apply to the coffee industry and supply chain. Before we get started, Mollie, would you tell us what you do and what Faegre Drinker does?
Okay, well, I think it's easier to tell you what Faegre Drinker does, and then I'll tell you what I do.
Okay.
Great. So Faegre Drinker is a combination of 3 firms. So there was Faegre, and it was headquartered in Minnesota, and then they merged with Baker Daniels, which was headquartered in Indianapolis, and then they merged with Drinker Biddle, which was headquartered in Philadelphia. So we were legacy. Our trade group was Legacy Drinker Biddle, and we used to say we did everything but immigration and divorce. And now we do everything. So we do everything, and we have a ton of offices in the United States, and then we have an office in London and an office in Shanghai. So we do everything. Our trade group also does everything trade related in the United States. So we call it like a 3-legged stool. So our first leg is traditional imports, which is all of what's happening now. And traditional imports, we say, answers 3 questions. When you import into the United States, what is it? What's its tariff classification? How much is it worth? What's its value? And then where is it from? What is its origin? And then the next leg of the stool is trade remedies. And those are like anti-dumping and countervailing duties. This is kind of World Trade Organization stuff. The Airbus Boeing dispute, that's anti-dumping and countervailing duties.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the third leg of the stool is export controls and sanctions. Russia, Iran, that kind of stuff. So our trade practice does all of that.
All right. Sanctions. Okay.
And so I primarily do imports and export controls and sanctions. I can spell anti-dumping, but that's about it.
That is fantastic. There is a couple of interesting things that you said in there that we will get through this series, particularly something that stands out to me that could be a big implication for the coffee industry is where is it from? Because I suspect that that's going to be quite an interesting question that's going to be asked, not necessarily for the coffee side of the coffee industry, but for the equipment side and the merchandise side of the industry. And we're going to talk about all of that as we move through this conversation. But you are a lawyer.
Yes.
And a partner at the firm. So what do you specifically do?
Well, since February 1st, the day of the first round of tariffs, I have spent pretty much all of my time telling people how to understand what is it, how much is it worth, and where is it from.
Right. And you do work within the coffee industry.
And food
Amazing.
importers and equipment importers. Yes.
Okay, excellent. So folks, we have the right human with us that is going to help us understand exactly what's going on. So tell us, I guess the best place to start from is, what are the tariffs as we know it while we're recording this at 9 p.m. in the evening Dubai time on the 22nd of April? Who knows what happens by 10 p.m. Dubai time.
Hold on. I also have to check Truth Social before we...
Just before we go forward.
Yeah. Okay.
This is fantastic.
All right, we're good.
Nothing new.
Okay. Good. So right now, we'll start kind of in order. These are just, we're going to forget the auto tariffs. We don't have to talk about the auto tariffs.
Okay. Right.
So as of February 4th, there began tariffs of 10% on China, and this affected all tariff classifications. So during the first Trump administration, he put in tariffs of 25%, 15%, and then it went down to 7.5% on goods from China, but it did depend on tariff classification. So not everything had these tariffs on them. But as of February, everything from China had tariffs of 10% on it. So that was big news. He did threaten tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but he paused them until March 4th. So on March 4th, the tariff on China went up to 20% on everything by tariff classification. Everything. And this was in addition to the tariffs from his first administration. And then there were tariffs on Canada and Mexico products, everything, irrespective of tariff classification. So we had 20% on China and 25% on Canada and Mexico. March 7th, he helped relax those tariffs on Canada and Mexico by saying, if you qualify under the agreement we have with Canada and Mexico, our free trade agreement, some people know it as NAFTA. It's now called the USMCA. If you qualify under that agreement, then you have relief from those 25% tariffs. Not everything qualifies under free trade agreements, though. So it's important to make sure you qualify. So there was some relief. So March 7th, 25% on Canada and Mexico unless you qualify for USMCA, 20% on China for everything, plus whatever was assessed on China under the first administration. March 12th, and this may impact the coffee industry for machinery, as well as for like blister packs for, the pods, empty pods.
Oh, yeah.
So March 12th, aluminum and steel tariffs went into effect of 25%. And these were based on tariff classification, but it was for all countries. So based on tariff classification, if you were importing aluminum and steel products, as well as certain derivative products, so certain products that were considered to contain a lot of aluminum and steel by tariff classification, you are now subject to 25% tariffs.
Could that include coffee machines and roasting machines?
If they have certain tariff classifications, yes. So,
okay.
And this was in addition to the Canada, Mexico, China tariff.
Okay.
So there are certain exemptions to these tariffs, including if they contain aluminum or steel that was smelted, melted, poured, or cast in the United States.
Jesus. Okay.
Or if you have a derivative product that is classified outside of the traditional aluminum steel classifications, you can basically only pay tariffs on the aluminum or steel content. So you can kind of reduce the amount of tariffs that you pay. The 25% is only on the aluminum or steel content. But those aluminum pods, those are classified in the traditional aluminum. Okay. But the machines, if they had a classification, those would not be within the traditional aluminum classification. So you could probably reduce the amount of tariffs that you pay.
Okay. And where are we at now with the tariffs?
Oh, well, then we come to April 2nd, which is
Liberation Day.
Liberation Day, where President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs to get us at the level of tariff that other countries assess on us, which actually had nothing to do with tariffs at all and was based on a random formula involving GDP or trade deficits. Yeah, ChatGPT or Elon Musk ChatGPT. And also the thing that he held up at the press conference didn't match the actual tariff. But anyway, so the idea behind that was
1 + 1 = fish.
Right. April 5th, 10% tariffs would go into effect for every country. And then April 9th, tariffs on specific countries would be increased to a certain level. April 9th came and tariffs were increased for 24 hours. And then a pause, but it wasn't a pause. It was just a reduction to 10% for all countries for 90 days.
Except China.
Except China, which is at 125%. So China has now 125% plus the 20% from March, plus whatever underlying tariffs we had from the first Trump administration. So we could have up to 245% for certain products.
You know, there was a post that you did on LinkedIn talking about the White House website, which, folks, do yourself a favor and go to whitehouse.gov.
Don't.
Please do yourself a favor. It is the best website that you could ever imagine. And I will forever thank you, Mollie, for posting about that, because you were pointing out about this 245%, that it may be a typo and may not be a typo. I mean, the fact that we are considering a typo as a legitimate thing on a government website is fantastic, first of all. And then you're like, surely it couldn't be. Then you click on the link and you go and see what the White House website looks like now. And you absolutely understand what Mollie is talking about. I'm going to include a link in the show notes. Do yourself a favor and go there and post it on social media. It is worth everything. I mean, anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is not a comedian on top of everything that he's doing, I don't know what you're smoking. It's fantastic. Anyway, Mollie, I forgot to say thank you to you.
Well, he also ends like some of his Truth Social posts with like, thank you for your consideration or something, which is also very funny in my opinion. So
I think he's hilarious. I'm not sure that I agree with anything other than that, but I think he's hilarious.
I mean, I am that when I'm like talking to like government officials and I want to be like, thank you. Please listen to what I'm saying. So, all right.
Oh, wow. So,
wait.
Anyway, back to the go ahead.
Yeah. So from the reciprocal tariffs, though, there are certain very good exemptions. The first are if you are subject to the Canada-Mexico tariff, you are not subject to the reciprocal tariffs. So, under the first Trump administration, if you had a Chinese product, like a product in Mexico that was being made from a lot of China components, you could qualify for NAFTA and you could qualify as a product of Mexico. But you could also qualify as a product of China and have to pay the China tariff. And you can still have that happen where you have qualify as a product of Mexico, qualify for USMCA, and pay the China initial Trump tariffs and pay the 20% China tariffs, but you don't have to pay the 125. Another fun exemption is that if you have the aluminum and steel tariff, you are not subject to the reciprocal tariff.
Okay, let me see if I understand this. So if I'm a coffee roasting company in Minnesota, right? I make coffee roasting machines. I'm not talking about anyone specific, even though there is one in Minnesota. And I get my equipment made in China. If I decide to have that made I get all the parts sent to Mexico and I get it assembled in Mexico. Does that fall under the China tariffs or does that fall under the Mexico tariffs?
It depends on whether it's considered a product of Mexico under what are known as the USMCA marking rules.
Right.
And then you also need to do a substantial transformation analysis to see whether it's a product of China for the initial Trump tariff and the 20% March tariff. But if it is a product of Mexico for the USMCA marking rules, then you are not subject to the 125 China tariff.
Amazing. And I just want to preface this by saying none of this is legal advice, folks.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, we will have links in the show notes so that you can contact Mollie and hire their firm. There's no financial arrangement between Map It Forward and Faegre Drinker or with Mollie or anything like that. Again, this is just about us having open conversations about what's going on. I want to reiterate, none of this is business advice. None of this is legal advice. Okay. So, Mollie, where I want to take this in the last part of this episode of the series is these, the big question here for our industry is about the fact that coffee, about 1% of the total amount of coffee that is consumed in the United States, all of the coffee that's grown in the United States doesn't even come up to 1% of the amount of coffee that's drunk in the United States. And so it's not possible for the United States to produce coffee to meet its demands. So what, like at face value as it stands now, separate from China, when it comes to the green coffee and roasted coffee element of the coffee that's coming into the United States, which of the tariffs apply? Is it the 10% tariffs sans Mexico and Canada, or is it first of all the 10% tariffs, and then if the reciprocal tariffs come back, it will be those first?
So right now it's the 10% tariff unless it's coming from Mexico or Canada and meets those rules of origin. And then if the reciprocal tariffs come back on July 14th, then it depends on what country of origin it is. And so it could be subject to whatever country of origin it is. So.
Okay. All right. So that gives us a great baseline. Is there any other basics that we need to know about these tariffs at this point before we move on to the next episode?
No, I don't think so.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. In the next episode, folks, the way that we're going to go about this series is we're going to look at what are the implications for small, medium, and large businesses within the United States. So our next episode is going to focus on the businesses within the United States. The third episode is going to focus on businesses doing business with the United States, so businesses that are supplying the US. And then we're going to talk about the consumer within the US and how this is going to impact them. And then in the final episode, we're going to talk about how you can mitigate the effects of these tariffs. So that's how this series is going to flow. So join us in the next episode and we're going to talk about how this is going to impact businesses within the United States. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.